specific functions which you can import using require, and you will be able to use the functions inside them using the dot notation, because the data transfer is happening as an object. So this is the thing we saw in the last class, what are objects and how it worked. We also talked about what node is and other things. Now what we'll talk about is we'll talk about all the specific individual modules and some function which are useful to you in these places. Now the first two are pretty simple. They give you access to information about OS, and path gives you some function which you can use to build path. Now when I say path, right, we'll talk about that when we come to path. Let us focus on OS now. So you know how to do this, right? You can just go create a new folder, open Visual Studio Code, open a new window, like new window. You will minimize it, drag and drop that folder inside the Visual Studio Code. It will open that folder for you here. Now after you have done that, right, you can click all these things to create packages. So what we'll do now is we'll work with the functions inside OS. Now there are a lot of functions inside OS. Okay, OS is not actually that big of a module, but still it has at least some 13 to 15 functions. So how do you use these built-in modules? Now when I was importing and exporting modules in the previous session, right, what did I do? I gave the path or the path directory, which is something like this. We also talked about what a single dot means, which means searching the current folder, and what the double dot means, searching the parent folder. So but since module is actually not something that is not present in some folder, but it is actually it is actually built inside node modules, so it does not exist somewhere, it comes with the framework itself. In that case, you don't have to give some path. Okay, you don't have to say the path, you can just say the module name, and this is the syntax you use to import built-in modules. So if I'm going to import OS, right, I would have to say const OS is equal to require OS, and I would have successfully imported all the functions inside OS. We also talked about the do the object description for built-in modules, meaning instead of getting all the functions, I can take the specific function that I'm going to use right now. So OS now, for since you guys are all know about computer or computer science, you guys must know what an OS is. What is an OS? The full form of OS is operating system. All right, and operating system is what will let the user access the hardware. Okay, whatever hardware it is. Okay, almost all computers or all devices need OS. Yeah, even your washing machine, calculator, fridge, what TV, mobile phone, computer, server, everything needs OS. And if it is not a computer, mobile phone, or a server, okay, the most commonly used OS, like for other normal devices like fridge, calculator, all these things, stabilizer, the OS used inside these devices are actually Linux. Okay, Linux operating system. And Windows, Mac are all a fork of Linux, meaning they implement features from Linux, but they build on top of it so that user experience is a little more enhanced. So the most famous OSs are, as you know, Windows and Mac OS. Linux is also good, but Linux is majorly used by developers because Linux does not have bloatware, or you can specifically uninstall bloatware if even if it did. Like the moment I install Windows or any other OSs, right, it comes in with baked in bloatware and stuff. Bloatware meaning applications that I don't need but are already present inside the OS to give me or to give the user a better user experience. Now this OS is what is going to actually let the user access the system hardware. I told you every computer will have a memory module, a hard disk. Hard disk and memory are two different things. Okay, when I say memory, the memory I mean is RAM. If you go open your task manager, the shortcut to open your, there are a lot of ways to open your task manager. You can right click in the taskbar. This is the taskbar. You can right click here and open task manager, or you can press Control Shift Escape. That will also open your task manager. And if you go into performance, right, you will look at, you can see the all the hardware. The disk is the actual storage, and memory is the RAM. Okay, so they are two different things. Memory is actually not the space where it is stored. It, memory is used for calculations and stuff, for processes that is currently happening, because memory is faster than disk for all computers. Okay, RAM is faster than storage because RAM is you don't have to worry about all the hardware nonsense. So the thing what OS does is, OS is the layer that helps the user interact. Now the user is going to interact with the OS. This is going to be the OS, and OS has something called the system kernel. And this system kernel is what is going to take in commands from the user through OS, and all the commands will be given to the system kernel, and the system kernel will decide what hardware to use to solve the problem, like whether to use the CPU, whether to use the RAM, whether to use the storage, or whether to use all three in conundrum, depending upon the command or the problem given by the user through the OS. So that is how a normal computer works. If you give a normal computer without installing any OS, right, a user cannot use it because he won't know what to do with the hardware. He won't even know how to give commands to the hardware directly, because OS is what is going to schedule commands to the hardware through system kernel. So OS is pretty much how OS is going to be the application layer. Okay, and this application layer is where all our applications are going to run. Mobile applications run inside Android and iOS applications. Website run inside Chrome, which in turn runs inside Windows, Mac, or Android. And softwares are programs which are basically, run directly inside the OS. Like mobile apps, inside mobile apps, they run in Android, right? So softwares like, bit different, antivirus software, Chrome, all these things run inside Windows, directly inside Windows, so they don't have to go through some browser or things. So OS, that is pretty important to get in information about the user. because the user is not interacting with the hardware, he's interacting with the OS. Even when I was setting up the node environment, right? I think we did this in the last class. When I was setting up the node environment, when I went into the node website, the website automatically detected that I was inside Windows OS and showed me the program for Windows OS. If you opened that website inside Mac OS, right, the website would have shown you the program which you should download for Mac OS. So OS information is also important. OS will give you direct information about hardware too, like how much free space is there. Whenever you are downloading and installing through Play Store, right? If you don't have enough memory or storage, the Play Store will tell you cannot download this application because you don't have enough space left. Delete some application in order to create spaces and install it. Now, Play Store is able to do that because Play Store has access to OS data, which in turn tells it that only this amount of free memory or free space is left. So the application size is this. So you won't be able to download and install it. Now that is how OS will work. So let me require OS first. Let us actually go into the code and work with OS. OS. Simply, this is going to import the functions which are used inside OS. You can do it like that, or you can say freemem. Import specific functions that you are going to use. Now, since this is for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use some more than one function. So what we'll do is we'll create var a is equal to OS dot. When I say OS dot, right, I told you whenever you are importing a module, the data is going to be treated as an object. Since it is treated as an object, you have to use the dot notation. A dot something. It can be property. In this case, the properties are going to be function names, and the property value is going to be the function logic. Function name, function logic. So when I say object a dot property name OS dot free mem, what is it going to do? It is going to run the logic. So let us say node. And what is it showing me? This is showing me the free memory or the RAM, free RAM that is available in my system right now. Now, this is important to check whether some application, not to download an application, but whether an application can run or not with the free memory available. I told you, right? Everything inside any process command requires RAM. That is why RAM is important. RAM is faster than storage. You can store all information inside storage, but RAM is what is going to take the data, and with the help of CPU it will process that data, because CPU requires faster transfer of data, and since RAM is faster than storage, RAM is used. So you can understand, right? To run an application, RAM is necessary. So free mem, available memory. You can, instead of free mem, you can say total mem. Total mem will give you the total amount of memory in your system. You can see there is 16 some amount of, or 16 GB memory, or 16 GB RAM. Now, just like total mem and free mem, you can type. I think type is the one which shows us the OS type. So you can see type will give you Windows NT, and you don't have to remember all the functions. You can go here, press Control space bar. I've taught you this shortcut already. It will predict all the things. It will predict all the functions or whatever things you can do right in that space. User info, I'm storing the data inside variable A and printing it, and it is printing user info. it will contain some user data, what is the home directory, uid, gid, and shell, if I have some shell or not. So after user info, you can also use CPUs. This will give you information about the type of CPU. Okay. And release, this will give you the version number or the release. I don't think it is version, I think it is release. Yeah, it gives you the release of the Windows, like, or whatever OS you are using. Since I am using Windows NT, it is telling me this is the latest release, or this is the release installed in my system. Like, Windows normally releases security updates or bug updates every month or so, right? So something like that. And after that, what else? um Premium network priority uptime. Yeah, version info is going to give you the version, not a release but version. It is Windows 11, that is the version. Release set priority. So these are some methods that you can use. I told you, right, get priority and set priority. I told you, so OS is what takes all the commands from the user, gives it to the system kernel, and system kernel decides which hardware to use to solve which problem. And system kernel can do all of this because it has something called the priority index. Okay, for every command that comes through the OS, there will be a priority number between 0 and 10, or I think it is between 1 and 10. Okay, not 0, 1 and 10. And 1 means top priority, 10 means lowest priority. So if you want something to run first, right, before all other commands, you can manually set the priority. By default, system kernel sets 5 for all the commands, unless and until you tinker with it and change it. You can change the priority index or the priority value. You can see, right, it takes a number from anything between, it can't be 0, minus 20 and 19. So yeah, priority index can be between minus 10 and 19. I think this is inside node. The thing is, the system kernel is going to read it in between 0 and 1. Okay, but inside node, you can set it manually between minus 20 and 19. So uptime, what is uptime? Uptime is going to tell you how long the system has been running in seconds or milliseconds or something, I don't know. So these are some of the functions inside OS module. You can go into, I told you this already, you can go into the documentation, go into OS, and you can browse through all the functions that you can use. Home directory is the home directory, host name is the host name. We looked at that, right? What, I can just take user info and it will tell me username, home directory, all of those info. So this, anyways, what are the methods? User info is pretty much something you will use. Now whenever you are downloading and installing some program, right, it will directly go get installed in your home directory, because inside your home directory there will be something called program files. Inside that only all your files, programs will be installed. You can change your home directory manually also, but don't do it. It will cause out error if you don't know what you're doing. User info type, or what was that, version? Version is also something important. It will tell you what type of OS you are using, like Windows 11, Windows 10, Mac 17, all these things, Mac OS 17. And type will tell you the type of OS. Release will tell you the release, uptime, free mem, total mem. What else? What else was there? Um, I think we also used something like uptime, uptime, uptime. We told uptime. So if you want, you can go and find out more functions. So these are some basic functions that you can use to take in OS information or information about the user. Now, all the information about the user is actually going to be present inside OS. Okay, so you don't have to say OS information. You can directly say user information, because the user can only interact with through the OS. Even the front end, I told you, right? The front end is something the user is going to interact with. Helps the user or the client interact with the UI elements. But without OS, right, the front end cannot even be rendered. So OS is something very basic. Next comes path. Okay. So to import path, what do you do? Instead of OS, you say path. And that will give you access to path functions. You can see join, resolve, dir name, base, relative. These are all functions from path. But don't do it like this. Actually name it appropriately. Since I'm importing path, I'll say path. So these are all the functions that you can use inside what path. There are more functions inside path, but these are the main functions which we'll be using. Join, dir name. You don't have to say dir name. Okay, I'll teach you how another short to do this function. And join, parse, resolve. These are the join and resolve. You, and even path sep. Path sep is actually pretty important. You have to understand about path sep, because it is a little bit complicated. Not complicated, it is simple, but what is path sep? Path sep is actually not a function. You can see, unlike other things which I've been using parenthesis, I'm not using parenthesis for path sep. Even here you can see it, right? For everything there is parenthesis except for sep and win32, because path sep is actually data. I told you, right? Inside module you can export data and function. If you are calling a function, you have to use parenthesis, but if you are calling a data, you don't have to use parenthesis. And since I'm calling data, the path sep is going to print out the separator, this character. You can see it, right? This character, this is the path separator, the backward slash. Now, why is backward slash an important thing? If you look at the URL, right, you can see the URL always uses forward slash. Inside path directory, something it always uses backward slash. The thing is, I taught you this when I taught you about the basics of JavaScript. What happens when I use backward slash inside a string? It becomes an escape sequence. Whenever you type something and write something after the backward slash, it becomes an escape sequence, meaning the character you are using after the backslash will not be treated as a special character inside code. It will be treated as a string. So that is what backslash is used for. But if you want to use backslashes inside path, you have to use backslashes inside path, otherwise computer won't understand it. So to mitigate this issue, what they did was introduce path separator. That is why this data exists. to build a path. Now, I told you path is not a complicated module. Even though it is not a complicated module, right? It will be present in almost all projects, because reading and writing data to a specific path must happen inside every application. So resolving joining paths inside some directory is very important. So let us look at other things. Now let me say join. So by the name itself, you can understand what join will do, right? It will take in two paths and join it together. Now if I say from here to here, copy this, paste it here, and what I do is I give another path. I say comma and I give another path, and this path will be from OneDrive to testing. Now look very carefully, look closely. Okay, what is happening here? Every place I'm using this backslash. If you look at the character closely, you can see what is happening, right? It is actually not, look closely here. I hope you can see it now. Every time I use backslash, what is happening is the next character is not treated as a special character but a normal character. Okay. So to mitigate this issue, you know, since I told you, right, T backslash T in itself is an escape sequence which prints tab spaces. Now if I have to use this thing inside my path, how will it actually do? It won't work properly, right? Let me run it. You can see how it is printing. It is printing very, it is not the right thing. It is not printing it properly. So that is why path was implemented. You don't have to use backward slash. You can use forward slash, just like you will use inside a normal internet URL. And even though I'm using forward slashes inside my string, what basically happens is the path module takes it and makes it backward slash. Even though I'm using forward slash, it takes that and makes it backward slash. So this is good for building path, so that you can read and write inside a specific directory, path directory. We'll talk about that when we come to file systems module. Okay. So about path, join is one of the things. Now I told you, right, dir name. For dir name, I'll teach you another shortcut. Inside node, I already taught you a shortcut. What was that? Underscore. What did the underscore do? Previous evaluated value. What was that? Previous evaluated value. Like if I said node and I said 1 plus 2, it printed 3. And if I say underscore here, it will print 3 again. Why? Because that was the last evaluated value. But you can also do something else. You can say underscore underscore dir name and underscore underscore file name. So what is this going to do? You can actually see two things here, because I'm adding dir name and function name. When you use the underscore, right, it is going to capture, or let me not capture, join these two. So when I'm resolving, right, what will happen is it will remove the duplicates. Before I was joining two things, it does not have to be two, it can take multiple arguments. We talked about the dot operator, right? You can see the function here, it uses dot operator. I can give how many ever arguments as strings I want, and it will get translated into an array, and whatever elements inside that array will be joined together. That is how it is printing this. But since it is joining, right, it is joining it normally, the directory path directory is going to give me the current directory, which is testing folder. Underscore underscore file name is going to give the directory and the file I am currently working with. So it not only gives me until testing, it also gives me module testing.js, which is the file I'm working with right now. If I join it, right, it will join it without thinking if there's duplicate or not. But if I'm resolving it, what it will do is, if it will check if the paths are overlapping, and if it is, then what will it do? It will resolve that path into proper path, and it will give that as the final output. I hope you can understand this. Hope you can understand these three things. Or resolve, separator is important. Join, resolve. And instead of using the dir name function, you can use the double underscore dir name, or you can use the double underscore file name. Now remember, this is not, this is double underscore. Okay, I'm not using single underscore. I'm typing it two times. It might, it might look confusing, or you might, if you're looking at code and typing it by looking, right, you actually will miss this. So I'm telling you, when you look at dir name like this, always remember this is not a single underscore, this is double underscore. In the early days of coding, I did this mistake a lot, so remember that. Okay, so when you're using path, remember to do this. So these are two modules which are good for you, which will help you basically, take care of all the smaller stuff, so that your experience, you can do all of this without using Node. You can code all of these functions from scratch using only JavaScript, using all the things I've taught you. We taught how to create a function and how you can define your own logic to do stuff, right? So what is resolve actually doing? Resolve is actually taking two strings, or how many ever strings, using the dot operator, or the spread operator, sorry, not the dot operator, spread operator, and it is joining all of it while checking for duplicate. Now think about how you can do that using your own algorithm. You write an old algorithm to do that? It is actually pretty easy, but let us not do that now. Okay, so moving on, let us come to the file systems. Now file systems and HTTP are two of the main modules which are necessary to build a backend. Because right, what is backend? Backend is literally something that helps in communication of a data. It works as a bridge between the server and the front end, so that the data from the server can go to the front end. So it works like a bridge for data. Now I also told you what things you can do to a data, right? The CRUD operations. We'll copy paste this. We'll do this when we come to Express. So file systems. So file systems, what it basically does is it helps you read and write file in different ways. File systems is actually a pretty big module, but we'll be focusing on three functions, or three type of functions. There are a lot of implementation for two types of implementation for all three functions, async and synchronous. We'll be focusing on both the things, but first I'll be focusing on the file systems. Okay, so these are all the functions and methods that are present inside file systems. You can use any of these things to handle data, but the most important things are to read and write. There are a lot of implementation, but read file and write file, or read file sync and write file sync, all of this comes under file handling. But we'll also be talking about asynchronous. We'll also be talking about create reach stream. This is an important concept. We'll talk about it later. Um, yeah, synchronous APIs. The first two methods I'll be teaching you is synchronous APIs, which are going to be read file sync and read file sync and write file sync. So both these things are important because they can read and write file directly inside the system where this application or the program is running. So for file systems, again, you can just say FS for file systems and FS. Now, since we'll be doing something like that, right? And also because file systems is a big module, don't always try to import the whole module. Try to use the object restriction or the property restriction, module restriction syntax to import specific functions that you will be using inside your thing. Now, if I had to use read file sync, right, I would have to say fs dot read file sync. But instead of this, if I know inside this program I am only going to be using read file sync, instead of saying fs here, I can open curly braces and say read file sync. And what will it do? I can directly call the function name and it would work normally. You don't have to say fs dot read file sync. Since I'm object destructing it, I don't have to dot notation. I can just use the function directly, and you can import multiple functions. So the first two functions we'll be learning right now is read file sync and write file sync. Now I want to teach you about read file, write file, and create reach stream. You know, you don't have to learn about actually create reach stream is more efficient than using the actual streams module. Okay, there is also something called streams module, but you don't have to use streams module, right? Systems module already has the capability to conduct a stream, to make data into a stream. We'll talk about streams and the async functions later after I teach you about the async concepts. But right now we are only going to look at the read file sync and write file sync. Let us look at what these two things can do. So the first thing we'll be doing is we'll do write file sync. So what does write file sync actually do? Now, as the name suggests, right, it is going to write data inside the hardware of the OS where the application is running. I told you an application needs an OS to run and the OS needs hardware to run. So since the write file sync is running inside some specific OS, it will write files inside that specific hardware. Now the syntax for write file sync, you can already see here. You have to give the path, you have to give the data, or you can also use array buffers. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about buffers and streams later. So right now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say um, slash some testing dot testing.txt. All right, and I'll give some random data. I'll type something. All right, and what this is basically going to do, since I've done dot slash, it is going to create a file inside testing itself. It is going to write a new text file because I'm saying dot txt. All right, you can create any file. It does not have to be a text file. Write file will create any type of file. And what it is doing is actually write file cannot store data inside a variable and you can't print it. So all I'm going to do is read this or create a new file using this. Let me save this and run this. Now you can see inside testing, the only file is module testing.js. The moment I run this code, what will happen is a new file will be created called testing.txt and its content will be some random data that we have given. You can see it. You can give, if you have some actual data, you can give the data. Normally in the real world application, you'll have actual data. Okay, you won't have random stuff. So this is how you write a new file inside the system you are running the application. You can also do it asynchronously. Asynchronous function will not have the sync keyword inside the function signature or the function name. Okay, we'll talk about the asynchronous function after I teach you about some node concepts. After I teach you about the built-in modules, we'll move on to the node concepts. How node makes JavaScript asynchronous, what is the usefulness of making it asynchronous, some things we can do after it has become asynchronous, like this write file, read file, and also about streams. So what are streams and those things, how to create and read streams. Now we have done a write file, right? Let us do read file. Read file sync. Now since it is reading, right, it is reading something that is already present. Now did you remember the, just a second guys. So did you remember what we did when we used push pop, all these things inside arrays? When we talked about arrays, I talked about some functions that can manipulate an array, right? When we were deleting or reading, actually when we were deleting, we took data outside of the array, so it can store data in a new variable. But when we were adding new data, in this case inside file systems, when I used write, right, I was actually adding new data, so I was not able to store it inside a new variable. But now we are not actually deleting, but we are actually trying to read. Okay, we not delete but read. Since I am reading something, that data has to be stored somewhere. I can directly print it, or I can directly use it for manipulation. But the proper way to do it is store it inside a variable. You can also store it inside a const. It does not matter. Const is used to create variables whose data must not be changed or cannot be changed. Now, since I'm reading, what am I going to read? I'm going to read the file that already exists, which is testing.txt. So, when all of this is happening, I told you, right? Node is a framework and JavaScript is a high level language. Even though all of this is in English, right? The computer is actually going to process stuff in a different way. It won't be in English. Even this file. So what does it mean? Let me print it. You can see what is happening, right? It creates a buffer and you can see all of this data, right? But what is this data and what is it printing? When you are trying to read text, right, English or any other language for that matter, what happens is inside internet something called ASCII, American Standard Internet or something. Okay, I don't remember the full form. The full form of ASCII is, yeah, the full form of ASCII is American Standard Code of Information Exchange. So when internet was built, right, everyone started using internet, and what happened was people from different places used different encoding to make or encode their files. Now this is a text file. Me as a human can read it. Actually, this is random stuff, I can't read it. But if it this is a text file and me as a human can read this text file, but we'll actually try to read this text file. What we'll do, I'll say dot slash file name is actually full stack. So this is going to be our encoding whatever data, and it is actually reading this current file right now and printing the file we are trying to store all our things. What it will does is, for all the characters, before it was standardized so that everyone can look at the data properly. If there was not a single standard, right, and everyone was using different encoding for their files, the things on the internet would become a little bit complicated. Me who uploaded a file to the internet would have said A, but you who are downloading the file from the internet and reading it will look at the file and see B, because you are using a different encoding, I am using a different encoding. So to mitigate this issue, ASCII character encodings were introduced, and the ASCII characters encoding use something called UTF encoding. UTF-8 is the most widely used encoding, okay, because English or language letters are easy to encode. UTF-16, UTF-32 are all, I think, used for symbols, complicated symbols and stuff. Okay, you can see this, right? Character encoding uses 8. Character means A, B, C, D, all these things. But symbols, even inside internet, you will see symbols, right? Symbols use UTF-16 encoding. so that the characters can have some code, and this code will be uploaded inside the internet, and whoever wants to see the symbol inside their computer, when they click it, the computer is going to read the UTF-16, decode it. Since it has encoded inside this algorithm, the computer will decode it, and you will see the symbol properly. And since they are using some normal standard encoding, which is standard throughout the internet, that is why it is a standard encoding information exchange, and it will work properly. Okay, so here what you can say is, to read it properly, you can say something like UTF-8 or ASCII. There are a lot of encoding. Base 64 is actually something that is used for images to make it particle. Okay, you don't have to worry about all the encoding and stuff, man. But know at least some encodings. The more you learn about these things, the more you will get to understand all this. So I have added the UTF-8 decoding to my read file sync. Now if I try to print it, right, it won't print data as encoded things. It will print the data as if I am able to, as if the human can read it in English or whatever language the file is in, because it is encoded in such a way inside UTF-8. It is not printing the new things because I have not saved it. Let me save it. Let me run the code again. So now you can see it also shows the new things. So UTF-8 is one of the encodings. Now what else? You can read this thing, write it inside testing. You can change a new file by like that. Like you can say write file sync, and I can say dot slash testing dot txt, and what I'll do is I'll give data. And what data am I going to give? I am going to give new data in this text file. Let me say something. And what I will do is, you can see here, I'm not using single quotes or double quotes. I'm using backtick because I'm going to use this variable data inside this string. What is this variable data? This variable data, we just printed it. It is the data of this text file. So what I will do is, I will say dollar parenthesis a, and that's it. So what will happen is, if I try to run this code again, it will rewrite the testing.txt. And if you go there now, right, it will say new data into the, okay, new data in this text file. And from full stack, let us actually go to the next line. How do you go to the next line? You use the escape sequence \n. It will go to the next line. So now if I rerun it, it will say new data in this text file, full stack application, and the file will start. I hope you can understand what is happening here. So this is what we have been looking: read file sync and write file sync. So we look at the async implementation and the streams implementation after I teach you about the node concept. Now let us come to the major thing, which is HTTP. Okay, I told you file sync and HTTP are two major packages, right? Even file sync, you can say other frameworks have other modules or other functions to handle read and write. But HTTP is something universal, because HTTP is pretty much used in all frameworks, not only Node. Okay. The full form of HTTP is actually Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is a protocol. And what is a protocol? You know what a protocol is, right? The normal definition of a protocol is a set of rules. In dictionary, if you look at what a protocol means, it will tell you set of rules. Protocols to do surgery, protocols to do transfer of data, all of these things. There are different protocols in different professions, but inside internet, right, to make internet work properly, there are some protocols, there are some rules that data transfer must follow. If it does not follow these protocols, right, then it would cause some error. No, just a second, guys. So coming back to HTTP, all frameworks are going to use this HTTP module to communicate in the internet. Now we are building a full stack application. All right. So we talked about what before I talk about this concept, does anyone have any doubts until the modules we've looked at? Do you have any doubts until the things we have looked at? If you have any doubt, I'll clear that you now. If not, we'll move to the HTTP module. I hope you guys are all clear with that now. So we are learning how to develop a full stack application. And what is a full stack application? A full stack application is something which has front end, back end, and the server. And the server is actually connected to the internet. So for you to understand how to develop a full stack application, right, you have to understand something very basic. What is internet? Now, internet is not something your ISP provider gives you. Internet is not something someone's maintaining. Internet is not something that is built somewhere. Okay, internet just exists. You are internet. Every computer that is connected is internet. Internet is basically connection of computers. I told you a computer can be anything. Something which has memory module, CPU, processing power, and storage is a computer. Now, the largest computers are, supercomputers and servers. So, servers are the major things which maintain internet. They are not actually maintaining internet per se. They are storing data and which is connected to other computers. Now, internet was developed in 1940 or something. Okay, you know who developed internet? The people at MIT, Michigan Institute of Technology, inside in America, is who developed internet. At first it was actually not internet. Okay, it was called harpanet. And the purpose of development of something like that was not basically to do what we are doing right now. The purpose of that was basically to, MIT was a college. Okay, and people that did research and published papers. So people who published papers, what they did was they would refer researchers other paper which are used in their research. So it is like publishing paper which references other papers. What they thought was it would be easier if the reference papers were clickable and we could directly go into the reference paper. So what that meant was all the research papers were connected with each other so that you can uh, navigate between them through a click of a button. So nowadays we call it hyperlink. Whatever we search, right, this clickable text, this clickable text exists, and if I click this it will go to a new website, right? So the people at MIT developed something like that for the sole purpose of navigation between research papers easier, making navigation easier. So that in turn took a turn, and since the sharing was something very useful, what happened was, the military and all those things, they took that technology and they were able to connect multiple computers together, and data transfer in between them was easier. So internet is basically connection of computers together, and you are able to access internet through your ISP provider. you know when I say connected computers together, right, it is a physical connection, not some satellite or things like that. Physical connection. Even today, internet is possible only because of uh, you know submerged. If you go and look at this website, right, what you will see is it will show you how the world is able to, or how the infrastructure of the internet is present. If these cables, fiber optic cables, did not exist, you won't be able to access internet inside India, right? Inside India, you can see there are some connections, and these connections are what which lets Indian people access the internet. If these connections did not exist inside India, India won't be able to access internet. And who makes these connections? These connections are provided by the ISP provider. Who are the ISP provider? Airtel, Reliance, Andaman. What is this? Bay of Bengal. Tata is actually one of the major ISP provider, Reliance, right? And let me go here. Let us see all the things. I think Tata has something there. So you don't have to worry about this. You have to understand that internet is possible because of BSNL. All ISP providers take, or for every 10 years or something, the government of India will tender out these cables, physical cables, that the ISP provider will buy for a lot of millions of dollars, and through that only they provide your sim, mobile sim or Wi-Fi, the internet. They are connected physically through these fiber optic cables. They take that and broadcast it through the towers you look see, right, in the roads, big towers, telephone towers. Through that, they manually change it into radio signals, and your sim or your Wi-Fi or whatever, even sometimes they would even do it in fiber optics, it does not matter. So that is how you are able to connect to the internet. And when that happens, right, now that you understand internet is not something that exists, but it is a connection. Internet is not data, it is actually the connection, it is a network, net. Okay, you are able to connect to the internet. How are you able to connect to the internet? Because of ISP. But even then, there are some protocols which you must adhere to if you want to connect to the internet. The primary most protocol is known as the internet protocol or the IP. Now, without an IP address, no device, whatever device it might be, it cannot connect to the internet, because IP address is what is going to uniquely identify you and help you connect to the internet. Like every website, right? Every website will have an IP address. Like IPv4, IPv6 is a newer version. You don't have to worry about that. But every website will be hosted on some server, and this is going to be the server IP. You can actually, use your command prompt. Say ns lookup and type node.js.org, and what it will do is it will tell you the IP address of that server. It is called ns lookup, this command. It can tell you IP address of any server. And what basically happens is all the websites on the internet are, the data is hosted to some server. I told you connection, you can imagine the connections, even the fiber optic cables, to be some backend. That is not the right way, but right now, for conceptual advantages, let us imagine it to be backend or a bridge between the connection and the front end. It is bridging data from the source to the destination, and it will check, all of that will happen through IP. Only when it will check for this IP. Even Zoom has some IP, right? Yeah, IP is not different from IPv4 and IPv6. Okay, IPv6 is a newer version of IP, because you know people, the population is growing, or the internet population is growing. The people who use internet have become more and more, meaning there has to be newer IP, because everyone will have a unique IP rate. The number of IP generated is getting larger and larger every year. So IPv6 was introduced. IPv6 has some extra information to generate even more specific data, so that you know you can identify something even more specific. Not everyone has IPv6. Some only have IPv4, because IPv4 is enough. But you can see, right, not everyone has IPv6. Even you who is accessing the internet through your mobile or system won't have IPv. Now, you can check your own IP address by saying IP config slash all. It will give you all the data about who you are connecting to. TCP, transfer control protocol, internet protocol. It is also another protocol. You don't have to worry about all of this. Okay, the thing is, IP is going to identify you uniquely. IP will help you identify your device which is going to connect to the internet. I told you internet is a network of connection of multiple computers or devices. So now you can connect to the internet through the help of ISP. And when you do that, your ISP will give you a unique IP address through which you can connect to all other data. Now you can check whether you can connect to something or not by, you know, uh, trace route, something like this. So what this trace route will do, the trace RT is something called trace route. I told you, right, internet, it is a connection of computers. So I told you, I also showed you the submerged cables, right? When you are trying to access some server inside America, right, you won't directly go there. You will actually the maximum amount of hops you can do is 30. And what happens is, now it is not checking properly. Normally it would do, let me, you can see it is actually working. Trace complete. So these are the IP address. You can see I am using actcorp.in, which is basically my Wi-Fi. Okay, it is the ISP I am using. The ISP even act to give me the server, give me the service, Wi-Fi service will have lot of servers located in different areas. For inside Chennai itself, for Annanagar it will have a server, for Chengalpet it will have a server, for Tambaram it will have a server. So the ping is the amount of time it takes to reach that specific server. You can see the amount of time it took for my IP address to go to the nearest server of ActCorp took 2474 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And after the 2 seconds, what it did was it went to another ActCorp server. Or this is going to be the endpoint inside India. And this point, after this point, it goes to the American server. Basically because I am saying American server because Node is hosted inside America through cloud for United States, right? So what it will do is it will go through the fiber optics and it will go to the American server and it will finally reach the server, this server, the Node.js server. And what I'm actually doing is I'm tracing the route of data transfer. And what hackers basically do is, you don't have to know this, but they what inside the route you are traveling or your package is traveling, they try to interfere and try to siphon data like username, password, all these things, so that they can log in using things like that. If you give some wrong URL, right, it will say something like it cannot trace or something or things like that. Sometimes it will also return wrong because of request timeout. You can see the request timeout here, right? If it takes more than this or some amount of milliseconds, it will actually time out, meaning it is a fail. It will, if it fails 4 times in a row, right, it will end the communication, because that is also a rule inside the internet protocol. If it fails 4 times concurrently, the connection will be terminated. Sometimes you see timeout errors, right? The connection has timed out and you won't be able to see the website, right? That is the reason, because the route it is taking longer than it is anticipating. I hope you can understand this. If I try to connect to VPN and do this, right, it actually won't go through ActCorp. It will directly go through or it will go through ActCorp, but instead of going through the endpoint of my Indian server, it will directly go to the endpoint of some whatever server I'm connecting. If I'm connecting to, we can check it. you, you can try to connect through whatever country you want. You can connect to whatever country and it will route through that country. I hope you can understand how data transfer is happening through the internet. So you can understand how data transfer is happening through internet, right? Now comes the major part, which is the HTTP. Now, HTTP is what is going to familiarize how this data transfer is happening. IP will let you connect your device to the server that you are trying to connect. Now, this IP, right? I am searching for paintjs.org, but this is present inside some IP. But, just a second, guys. So coming back, what was I saying? What was I saying? HTTP. HTTP connects to the internet. So your device can connect to the internet, and this IP is the address. This address is your IP of your device inside the internet. You know, if you are sending some letter, right, without writing to and from, you cannot send the letter properly. This is one of the protocol. Another protocol is the HTTP. Now HTTP is actually what will check whether the data transfer has happened properly, or I am seeing this request timeout, right? We saw this request timeout inside the command prompt. When that happens, that is possible because HTTP is telling it the request as timeout, because HTTP protocol has another set of rules. One of those rules is you can only try this much amount of time to connect to a specific IP, to connect to a specific route. Now, when you, what is this IP? This IP, if you search for this, right, you actually won't get anything, because I am trying to access admin data. Now, if I am a host, then I can try to contact my. You can see direct IP access not allowed, because I am not the owner of this website. The owner of the website can access it directly, but I am not the owner. So how do I access this website? I access it through the URL. And what is this URL actually? Now think about something. You get your friend's number. Do you won't call your friend every time using his actual number, right? You will save his number inside your contacts list, and every time you have to call your friend, you will actually click his name. And when you click his name in the background, what happens is the IP access, I mean the IP address, or the, in your case, your friend's number will be used to contact him. In this case, the name is the URL. Now the name is also something that is maintained inside the internet, that is maintained by something called DNS. Okay, this is known as DNS. The full form of DNS is actually domain name system, meaning every IP address will have a domain name. What is a domain name? The paint in this case is the domain name. What is the domain name of Mayam? Mayam is the domain name. The domain name of Zoom is Zoom. Domain name of Node.js is Node.js. So somewhere in the internet, the IP address, somewhere in the internet, there is a contact list that will, you know, match the DNS name to the IP address name. So when you look for the name, it will connect it to you through the IP address. I hope you can understand this. And this connection also happens because of HTTP. So in our case, what we are going to learn is how this HTTP is going to work. So HTTP is basically going to again work as a middleware. I told you backend, right? All this transfer is happening through internet, and for internet to work, all of these protocols are necessary. But you will be working with majorly through HTTP protocol. Now HTTP protocol is the physical layer, or you can say network layer. You know, learn about computer systems architecture. Okay, there are 7 layers, and each layer will translate to something on the internet, or how the internet works. So HTTP layer is basically going to work as a mediator between the server and the front end. So there are two things that will happen. inside backend, whatever framework you are using, not only Node, backend is also referred to as, I told you, right, they can also be referred to as APIs, drivers, packages. But inside, when you are the one who is writing the backend, right, when you are the developer who is writing backend, you will normally refer it to as API to your teammates. But if you are referring it to your client for whom you are developing the application, you will call it business logic, because the client needs the application for his business, and the backend is actually processing the to and fro data to display the proper data through some logic. So that is called business logic. Backend is also referred to as business logic. So this business logic will determine what type of data will come to the server and go to the front end. Now, two things happen inside HTTP. One is the request. Request comes from the front end to the server. Now, without a request, backend cannot do anything. And how does a request happen? Request can happen through some clicks. If I click this button, the meeting will end. If I type something here and hit enter, that will be uploaded to the server. You will get it. Actually, Zoom uses peer to peer. Inside normal thing, it will upload it to the server and you will see it. So a request comes from the front end through interaction of the UI. What is UI? Buttons, input spaces, all these things are UI. And when something like that happens, after you have built the application and your client is using your application through the front end, he will send a request by saying, I need to know if there is a participant named Sanjay, and it will give me the data. How is it giving me the data? Because me as a user or a client is requesting this data, and the backend takes this request, processes it through the business logic. There can be lot of logic. In Zoom's case, searching for the participants is one of the logic. uh, Getting mute or scrolling through the comments, closing the chat box, all of this are other kinds of logic. When a request is sent, right, the backend will check whether the data requested by the client is present inside the server. If it is not present, right, what will happen? It will send out an error. If it is present, it will send out the data, and that is called response. The first thing that should happen is the request. Without requesting the data, the response data cannot come. But once you have requested the data, you can go to the response data. The server will send a response back to the backend, and the server won't send the response. The backend will send the response. The backend is going to send the response. The front end is again going to send the response, or going to send the request to the, not to the server, to the backend. The front end cannot talk to the server. Backend is the bridge, the only communication medium. So the front end sends a request to the backend. The backend has all the data it can access through the server. The front end cannot do that. So it will identify the type of request. It will check whether that kind of data exists inside the server. If it does, it will send the data back to the front end. If it does not, it will send an error response. Normally an error response is 404. This is something you guys might have already seen if you have browsed enough internet. You might have somewhere went through and saw it would throw out 404. What is this error? It is saying that the requested, you can see I am the one requesting, it is using the word request, and it is in this case I have typed inside the URL and hit enter. That is how I am requesting the, and the server in this case will send a response. What is the response? The response status code is 404. It is error. And this is the request URL. The response is actually, in this case, it is server side rendering. We'll talk about all this. Don't worry. Don't confuse yourself. You don't have to confuse now. So, this is how it works. I hope you can understand what is happening through HTTP. And all of this is happening through HTTP. You can go into any website, press inspect, it will open your developer console. Inside here, you can go to the network, because network is what will tell you all the internet data. You can reload, and it will tell you what are all the things that are happening in the background, and it will tell you all the things that went wrong, all the things that you did, why it is showing me this. You can see, right, it is showing me some robot.ping. This is some preview, all of this chunks of data, audio, visual studio, anything. Anyways, so this is actually the HTML. We are only working with the backend. You only have to worry about network now. We talked about how internet and network works, right? So the request URL, we also talked about URL. How the URL is basically going to hit a specific uh, IP address. Now, if I say trace route google.com, right, it will trace route for the google.com through, first starting from my IP, it will go to the what act corp, then it will go outside the act corp, then it will go to the Google server. I think Google is pretty much easy. You can see the third request has timed out. Sometimes timeout can happen because of overload of request. You know, at a time we talked about this request rate. Inside a real world application, request and response are not a single thing. Multiple clients will be using your application at the same time. Front end, in this case, let us say Facebook, there are millions of people using Facebook. So a request won't be a single request, a response won't be a single response. The back end or the business logic has to gain or process millions of requests every time, and send millions of responses every single millisecond. So it is very common for request to get timed out and to be used after some time. So you can see the trace is complete, what route my IP or the data took for this thing to happen. You can see the request, right? I requested this, and it got completed because the server sent out a response, or the backend sent out a response. I hope you can understand this. When we come to asynchronous rate, we'll look at a little more in depth in this concept. But right now, we'll work with some HTTP functions. Okay. Actually, the time is up. If you guys have some doubt, right, you can ask me, or else we'll end the session here today. So if you guys don't have any doubts, right, we'll end the session here today. From next class, we'll actually be working, developing server, and we'll also be working with MongoDB database. I told you, right? Server. We'll create MongoDB. I'll tell you how to create a free server inside MongoDB and do all these things. So we'll look at all of these things in the next class. So I hope we'll meet in the next session. I hope you can practice all these things. Anyways, and when you practice, and if you do get some errors, feel free to WhatsApp me the error. We'll try to debug it. Anyways, guys, you can leave the class. We'll meet in the next session. Thank you.